We're back to Mr. Sir Ronald Ross now, and on his return to India in 1895, Ross began his quest to prove the hypothesis of a man named Alphonse Leveran, love you man. Hi, my name is Richard Dix, and this is How Did That Happen? A podcast where I look at everyday things or events and try to figure out how they came to be. Every week I will research one topic, and by the end of the episode, I hope to truly have the answer to the question, how did that happen? Hello, and welcome back to another episode of How Did That Happen? This week we are discussing the Panama Canal. Come along for the ride this week as I ask, the Panama Canal, how did that happen? All right, we are here for another episode of HDTH. Like I said, we are doing the Panama Canal this week. When I was doing my research for this episode, I did find that and I mentioned it later on, there have been a lot of podcast episodes about this actual topic. A lot of the ones that I do, you don't see, as many people doing them as I've seen. So there was a large amount of information that was already available. I try to dig a little deeper and grab some things that I didn't think most people mentioned that I thought was worth it. Let's see, is there anything else I need to mention? Let's see, what am I watching right now? Not a lot, and I was thinking about it before I even stepped on here to do the episode. And I realized, it's because this is like a great time for sports. I'm watching a lot of sports is what I'm watching. I'm not watching very much TV or as far as like scripted shows or anything like that. My weekends are pretty much college football and then the NFL a little bit. I'm not watching that much NFL, but I still watch like it's on, in the background kind of. And then I'm a big baseball fan, so the playoffs are gearing up. So yeah, that's why I realized I was like, oh, you're not really watching anything. Then I thought, I was like, well, what are you doing with your time? Then I realized I'm watching the sports, but I did start to watch a movie called I think it's Don't Worry He Won't Get Far on Foot, and it's got like Joaquin Phoenix in it, Jonah Hill, some other people. Jonah Hill, as always, he just delivers. He's just a great actor. He always just seems to get it. But I've only gotten about halfway through with it. It's a little bit of dark material. The guy ends up getting into a car accident, and he wasn't even driving, and he gets paralyzed from like the waist down or something like that, and so he has to like deal with that, and also him being an alcoholic, yada. But so it's a pretty good movie from what I've seen, and I do intend to finish it. I just kind of have some other stuff going on, but I believe that is it. Like I see, I do want to say. I appreciate everybody who does come back and listen every week. We are, I'm seeing those downloads continue to go. I appreciate you guys. Without further ado, here is the episode. The idea of creating a water passage across the Isthmus of Panama to link the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans dates back to at least the 1500s. And before we get even deeper than that, I'll go ahead and define for you what an isthmus is and try to keep pronouncing it as well. An isthmus is defined as a narrow strip of land with sea on either side, forming a link between two larger areas of land. Now, after explorer Vasco Núñez de Balboa realized that a narrow strip of land separated the two oceans, King Charles I of Spain tapped his regional governor to survey the route. To survey a route along the river, the Chagres River. Is it I don't know. I'm not sure. Yeah, it turns out it's the Chagres River. I hope I got that right. The only other route was, the only other route to get around basically like South America would be to go, to sail around South America. And that's through using the Strait of Magellan, which nobody really wanted to do. Or you could use the Panama Railroad to basically transfer your goods, which is interesting. I never really thought about it, but I guess it makes sense to the way that they explained it. It is like the Panama Railroad was one of the first things to kind of be in that area as far as like moving commercial production. And so what you would do is, I guess, pull your ship up to like the mountain range that was keeping people from taking their ships through, and you would put your goods on a train that would then either take it through wherever you wanted to go, or I guess you could then have someone meet you with another ship on that other side. I don't know, but that's not what they said, but they said you basically could bring it up and the goods would get transferred onto the train and then I guess take them wherever they had to go on land. And so let's see. So there are two types of canals, and I thought this was important to mention before we get a lot deeper, because at first when I read this, I was just gonna try to gloss over it. I thought it didn't matter, but the reality of it is that this is actually pretty important, and this is the type of canal that they choose to build is what actually the land dictates that, I guess, if you will. So there are two types of canals, as I said. There's a sea level canal, which is one through which vessels may pass without obstruction of any kind, and that's the one that you see. I wouldn't say you see the most, but it's the one that probably comes to mind the most. It's literally you just digging your way through a place, and then putting some water there or whatever, and then the boats just kind of ride through as if it was already there. The lock canal is a little different in that it's an enclosure or basin located in the course of a canal or a river, or in the vicinity of a dock, with gates at each end, within which the water within which the water level may be varied to raise or lower the boats, and that's actually how the Panama Canal works. And had you have asked me this before, I would have had no idea. I thought it was just, I believe it's the Suez Canal is built that way. It's just a sea level canal. They just made a way, and there's some water in there, which is, and I don't get into it in this podcast because what I've realized is there are so many Panama Canal podcasts out there. We're not like ones based on them, but a lot of people have done episodes on the Panama Canal, even some surprising people. But so they mention a lot of different things, but they're well, I don't know. I guess I'll just say the people who built the Suez Canal thought that because they built the Suez Canal, that the Panama Canal was going to be a walk in the park, and it turned out to be a walk in the jungle with malaria and yellow fever. But we get to that, just not the Suez Canal part. So the French were the first to make an attempt in modern times to try to do a canal, and then there were two locations that they were deciding upon before they did it. So believe it or not, could have possibly been a canal in Nicaragua, but it never really got off the ground, never got out of the planning stages. But they went ahead and chose the Panama Canal, or chose to do the canal in Panama. Some say partly because the Panama Railroad was already there. There were incessant rains that caused heavy landslides, and there was no effective means for combating the spread of yellow fever and malaria when the French were trying to build their canal. Also, they were trying to build a sea level canal, which is important because everybody, even America, I think, tried. It was like you just can't do it. The way the dirt is laid out, and I watched videos on this. I'm gonna mess it up, but it's like basically like the jungle is what was keeping the dirt there. So when they started to take trees out and stuff like that to try to make way for it, they had these huge landslides. So it wasn't always just even the rain; it was the fact of like the way the terrain was made. You know what I mean? It was just almost going to be impossible to actually do a Suez like type canal. And I just had to stop for a second to Google and make sure the Suez Canal is in fact a sea level canal, because I didn't want to go on for the rest of this episode. It just sounded really dumb. But back to the French and their ill-fated effort to try to build a sea level canal in Panama. So they lost 22,000 people in their effort to try to build that, and that was in a mixture of people dying in the landslides and as well as just the malaria and the yellow fever. And we talk more about malaria later. But the 22,000 is a lot. For the record, I think the U.S. when they made theirs, they still ended up losing like 6,000 people. God rest their souls. And it's necessary to mention that malaria and its impact on these endeavors, because if it weren't for the discovery of mosquitoes, the mosquitoes' role in malaria, then there may not even be a Panama Canal today. That is actually, as I've done the reading, that is pretty accurate. So the term malaria comes from the ancient Greeks, I do believe, and they initially thought that malaria came from drinking swamp water, and then their ideas shifted to that it came from air, and so you get mal, meaning bad, and area, meaning air, bad air, and so that's how we get the term malaria. So what we have to do is figure out who is the guy, who is the fine gentleman who figured out that mosquitoes actually carry it. And so cue Sir Ronald Ross in 1892. This guy became interested in malaria, which is just an odd interest to have. Like, I guess back then they didn't have like phones or or anything besides diseases, I guess, to get involved with. But so, and he originally doubted the parasite's existence, so he sounds like a QAnon guy, and he became an enthusiastic convert to the belief that malaria parasites were in the bloodstream when this was demonstrated to him by a man named Patrick Manson during a period of home leave in 1894. And this guy, Patrick Manson, we're not going to go into it at all, but he's known as the father of tropical diseases, which is, that's what we all want to grow up to be. And on his return to India, we're back to Mr. Sir Ronald Ross now. And on his return to India in 1895, Ross began his quest to prove the hypothesis of a man named Alphonse Leveran, love you man, and Manson, that mosquitoes were connected with the propagation of malaria, and regularly corresponded with Manson on his findings, sending back letters back home. This is what I'm doing, man. What are you doing? I'm finding the malaria, maybe not. And so enter America into this whole thing. So Sir Ronald Ross is the guy who actually, like I said, kind of puts a saddle on this whole disease thing when they're trying to build the Panama Canal. So if it weren't for him, we probably wouldn't have gotten there. Or I mean, somebody would have figured it out eventually, but it was really him that was able to kind of mitigate that for America, so that we could go on and make this canal. And so enter America, as you know, yeah. The actual Panama Canal was developed following the failure of a French construction team in the 1880s, as we mentioned. And the United States commenced building a canal across the 50-mile stretch of the narrow Panama Isthmus. We define isthmus in 1904. So following the deliberations of the U.S. Isthmian Canal Commission and a push from old Theo Roosevelt, the United States purchased the French assets in the canal zone. So that's a big part of it, actually. And that's why there's even some people who were involved with the Panama Canal, even when they really probably didn't even want to. That's a whole different story. This thing, there should be, and I kid you not, I don't say this about everything, there should be some sort of like Showtime, like HBO show about the creation of the Panama Canal, and like really tell it, because it's wild. But like, so the assets, because the French already spent so much money in it, and they're already so like kind of deep into it, that the only way you could take over their operation would be to buy from them what they had already done, the work they'd already done. So that was just kind of to explain that. So the America bought that from France for $40 million in 1902, and when a proposed treaty over rights to build in what was then the Colombian territory of Panama, it was rejected. The U.S. military threw its weight behind a Panamanian independence movement, eventually negotiating a deal with the new government. Now, this is worth stopping and digging deeper and digging into, because when I read this, I was just like, here we go again, just being America, and you don't want it to be, but it is. Just like your old racist grandparents, you're like, don't be, but they're like, yep, we are. So because I did not know much about that part of the world, I like to stop and take a moment to just give you a little bit of history of Panama. So first off, it's what's known as a transcontinental country. Did not know that word. I knew the word existed, but I didn't know it existed in terms of like calling a country such a thing, because they're called this because it's a country that is technically on two different continents, and it's at the bottom of North America and at the top of South America. And it was originally inhabited by indigenous people before the Spanish showed up. They broke away from Spain in 1821. They eventually fall in with these dudes named Nueva Granada and create the Republic of Colombia around 1831, so like 10 years later. And here's where it gets tricky. So they stay a part of Colombia until 1903, when America's trying to get the canal built. It's at that point that Colombia is not feeling too hot about the idea of America taking over, the canal construction. And that's when the U.S., as I said earlier, backs the Panamanian independence, and then they sign a treaty with that new government that grants America exclusive and permanent possession of the Panama Canal Zone. What's very interesting about that was that there was no Spanish translation of the treaty. It was only in English. And it's just like, come on, America. Can we not be America for just like 5 seconds? The U.S. Senate ratified this treaty. Of course they did. But the Colombian Senate, fearing loss of sovereignty, which that's a very healthy fear, they refused. And in response, President Roosevelt gave tacit approval to a rebellion. He gave tacit approval to a rebellion by Panamanian nationalists. So he was just like, you guys go in there and get them, which began on November 3rd, 1903. And to aid these guys, he basically cut off railroad service, he hit their side of the railroad service, which coincidentally was the railroads that the Colombians were going to use to then bring troops in to fight So they were like, oh, got you there. And then also, I believe, what is it? The U.S. warship Nashville just pulls up on the coast,